18th of May 1944, 10:20 hours, Monte Cassino, 516 metres above the Liri Valley, the shattered Benedictine Abbey crouched in sun-whitened ruin. Its limestone blocks smoking under a May wind that curled the long drifts of artillery smoke like torn banners. The mountain held its breath. Polished eye corpse had clawed up the terraces through olive trees and gravel that slid like shot. Past caves turned into machining gun mouths, and walls honeycombed by the 1st Fallschirm J Division, men and rocks fused by months of bombardment. The slope demanded blood. A patrol from the 12th Podolian Uhlans edged into the gutted cloister. 2nd Lieutenant Kazimierz Goebbels' men, faces blackened, rifles low, boots whispering in dust that tasted of mortar and cordet. Silence trembled. On the far wall a white flag hung limp in the heat. Left by the German medics among their wounded, as the paratroopers slipped away in the night. To the next ridgeline under orders from 10th Army, the strong had conceded ground. Bugler Immelcheck climbed onto a toppled arch with a crumpled banner in his fist. The red and white. And when he tied it to twisted iron and let it snap against the monastery's sky, he lifted the brass to his mouth and blew the Hedjnov mariachi, the old Krakow call that dies mid-note, where legend says an arrow once struck a trumpeter. History cut the sound in half. Below, on terraces where the smoke lay in grey rivers, 3rd Carpathian Riflemen and 5th Kresowa Infantry hunched in shell holes that had been vineyards, their helmets scuffed white by chalk, their ears still ringing from the last climb up Point 593 and over the wrecked chapels along Snakeshed Ridge. Every metre had a name and a price. Wir verteidigen nicht Monte Cassino. Monte Cassino verteidigt uns, a German paratrooper had said weeks earlier as the ruins turned their jagged angles against every attack. The stones fought like men. Now the paratroopers were gone, their MG-42s and ATC Eben mortars silent in the caves, their Nebelwerfer trails long since blown flat by the barrage that had started at 2300 on the 11th of May and had hardly ceased in the night since. Even steel grew tired. Red poppies at Monte Cassino. A Polish song born in the bivouacs had promised. Drink Polish blood instead of dew. And on this morning the petals shook loose in downdrafts from shells still walking the next ridge. Poetry had learned the smell of smoke. Behind the Polish patrol, a chaplain stepped across a nave without a roof and sketched a cross in powder that rose from his finger like incense, while a signaller cranked his no. 18 set and tapped the message up the chain. Eflag, Rai Sid Owen Monastery. Every word a stone lifted from a nation's chest. A whisper became a shout. From the valley, the 205 by-pounders of 8th Army coughed and fell still in ripples as the guns walked away from the crest. Meanwhile, German wounded in the crypts blinked at sunlight, through gaps where frescoes had fallen and the Benedictine silence lay like a benediction over both uniforms. War paused in a church that had none left. A Polish stretcher team stepped past a carved Latin fragment and paused, heads bowed a fraction, and then bent to their work as another squad cleared a corner with the dry, professional swing of muzzles that had seen too many sudden returns from the dead, habit-guarded joy in the rubble. A cameraman cranked a bell and howled toward the flag, while the Biggle's last torn note died against the stone. A sound that didn't end so much as tip into memory. The void rang. At the foot of the mountain, mule columns shifted like dark stitches through smoke down the Route 6 corridor, and somewhere along the Rapido. Gurry to the locals. The water flickered with sunlight while engineers reeled in line after line of crossing gear they no longer needed. The road to Rome had blinked open. From a Polish company diary, scratched that night under a lantern, Woolley reached the abbey today. The wind blew our smoke into the cloister. It smelled of sulphur and herbs. We found the white flag and the dead who had no more language. The pen shook the page. Far to the west, the French Expeditionary Corps pushed the Urumtsi, and in the north the Americans battered the Gustav Line, until the mortar, slick stones, could hold no more. Here, on the high altar of the front, the paratroopers' boast met a regiment that would not climb down. Faith met will. The abbey's bell was gone, the library ash. The cloisters a geometry of broken shadow, and yet in the centre of absence, a flag insisted on colour, stitched by a brigade that had come from exile through Iran and the desert to write a line under a mountain. Exiles came home on a height. The Germans had believed this crown of rock impregnable, and had the reports to prove it. The Poles took it in smoke and blood, and a bugle that stops halfway. The mountain learned a different ending. The winter line in Italy ran like a stone zipper across mountains and rivers. Sangro to Garigliano, anchored at its strongest stitch by a 6th century abbey on a 566-metre limestone dome. Geography chose a fortress. Field Marshal Albert Kessering's defence hinged on the Gustav Line at Cassino, with 10th Army Heinrich von Vietinghoff holding the massive Trux IV Panzer Corps under Fridolin von Senger und Etterlin, and the 1st Fallschirmjäger Division dug in above the Liry and Rapido valleys. Doctrine married rock. Highway 6, Route 6 on Allied maps ran under that height toward Rome, and as long as the monastery crowned the ridge network. Monastery Hill, Point 593, Snakeshed Ridge. The road remained a killing ground. One summit decided a capital. Allied command in the theatre fell to General Sir Harold Alexander's 15th Army Group, with U.S. 5th Army's Ive Mark Clark on the left and British 8th Army, Sir Oliver Leese on the right, their advance checked since winter by stone, wire, mines, and a defender who understood angles. Momentum bled out. The Germans had built a defence that mixed medieval silhouette with modern fire, interlocking MG-42s, 80 Idens Granatwerfer 34 mortars, Nebelwerfer rockets, and 88 Muldeners guns sighted down terraces and mule tracks that glowed white with dust when shelled. The rubble fought back. Early attempts had failed in blood in January 1944, U.S. Thai Corps tried the Rapido, the Gary to locals, and was torn apart in crossings that sank under artillery and accurate machine gunfire. Later, in February, New Zealand Corps under Bernard Freyberg hurled 2nd New Zealand and 4th Indian Divisions at the town and the heights. Courage met geometry. On the 15th of February 1944, after days of argument, Allied airmen sent 229 medium and heavy bombers, B-17s, B-25s, B-26, over the abbey and dropped hundreds of tons of bombs, pulverizing the Benedictine complex that had stood since St. Benedict's Day. Stones turned to dust. The Germans had not occupied the monastery beforehand. Eyewitness monks and post-war inquiries agreed. But after the ruins fell, 1st Fallschirmjäger moved into the shattered cloisters and cellars and made a honeycomb of perfect fighting positions. Debris became bastions, Freyberg's second attack, and then a third march push through Cassino streets. Found close quarters, hell among collapsed walls, anti-tank guns firing down alleys at Churchill's and Sherman's, and snipers who could move through holes punched from room to room. Progress came in meters. By May the pressure had widened. The Anzio beachhead behind German lines strained under counterattacks, and the only way to relieve it was to break the Gustav Line head, on and roll the Liry Valley. Strategy forced a reckoning. Operation Diadem was Alexander's answer. 11th and May 1944, 2300 hours, a 20-mile front erupting with 8th Army's Exley Corps in the valley, Polish Sir Corps on the right against the Massif, and to the left, U.S. 5th Army with the French Expeditionary Corps. Alphonse Juin climbing the Urumtsi to outflank. The night pulsed with artillery. In the Polish sector, Lieutenant General W.I. Ades or Anders shaped his exiled army. 3rd Carpathian Rifle Division's Bronis or Dutch, 5th Kresoa Infantry Division, Nicodem Sulek, and 2nd Armoured Brigade, into assault groups to take Point 5 and 93, the Phantom Ridge, and the Monastery Spur. Exiles chose a summit. They had come a long road. Many had walked out of Soviet camps in 1942 to join Anders in Persia, then trained in the Middle East before crossing to Italy to fight. Za Nasad I Wasats Wolnope. For our freedom and yours. A motto became a mission. Opposite them, the paratroopers had turned the massif into a lesson in economy. Caves as machine gun nests, mortar pits cut into reverse slopes, range cards tied to shattered chapels, and telephone lines thread through rubble to observers who knew every fold of rock. Few men held much ground. The stakes were larger than a hill. The fall of Cassino would open Highway 6, unhinge the Gustav Line, and force Kesselring to withdraw to the next belt. The Hitler Line AS renamed Senga Line, unravelling the web that had stalled the campaign for months. One breach could tear the whole seam. Technology would dual stone again 25 5-pounders and 5.5-inch mediums for smoke and neutralisation, 7.2-inch heavies for counter-battery, British and Polish gunners registering every terrace, while mule trains hauled ammunition up footpaths that broke ankles. Firepower met gravity. Armour would be a rumour where gradients hit the sky. Engineers would lead instead, with Bangalore torpedoes, mine detectors, and reels of phone wire on shoulders, building steps through scree while infantry took turns under a sheet of smoke fired by whole regiments. The mountain favoured feet. German reports called the position Oneinenbar, unconquerable, its reputation fed by months of repulsed assaults, and the site of a monastery reborn as fortress. Belief hardened into doctrine. Yet even in German diaries a caution lived. Senga and Ettelin recorded respect for the Poles and worry about the Arunzi flank where June's Gomiers and Terralias flowed like water through goat paths. The net could rip from the edges. For Anders, the plan was simple and terrible: 2-set piece assaults, Weltfell 13th of May, and then 17th to 18th of May if needed, each preceded by overwhelming fire and shrouded in smoke, each aimed at wresting a series of tactically named points. 593-569. The Widmoke Phantom Ridge, before turning the monastery from the shoulder. The objective was stated in coordinates. 8th Army's fire plan would pulse by minutes, infantry would climb by hand and knee, and every company commander knew the price because the slopes told it straight during rehearsals. Training did not lie. To the north, 5th Army's diversion and the French attack promised to peel Germans off the massif. To the south, Sussery Corps would punch the valley gates and threaten the Hitler Line, and at the centre of the map, a white ruin held by paratroopers with MG-42s needed to be crossed by men who had no country to go back to. The line bent toward one place. Sir One Machinai Monte Cassino began to be sung on bivouac lines the week before the attack, the lyric promising that red poppies on the ridge would drink Polish blood instead of dew. Songs measured chances when maps did not. The Germans believed the massif impregnable, and paper plans looked like proof. The Poles believed that smoke and blood could buy a staircase to a flag, and they packed their mules accordingly. Faith and math drew blades. Monte Cassino's massif was a purpose-built engine of war. Terraces stepping like teeth, gullies as funnels, caves bored by water, and time now mouthpieces for MG-42s whose 1-200-1, 500 rounds per minute stitched white stone into dust, laced air. The mountain was a weapon. German fieldworks fused ancient rock with modern craft, sangars mortared into ledges, S-mines and telemines in the goat paths, wire festooned across breaks in the walls, and telephone lines threaded through rubble to observers who lived like moles beneath the ruin. Concealment became doctrine. The 1st Volksturmjäger Division adapted with a craftsman's pride. 80 cm RW-34 mortars sighted on every fold. 75 MANEV PAK-40s and 88 MAMEV guns sighted for plunging fire into the approaches, and Nebelwerfer rockets waking the valley in serrated shrieks that fell like doors. Fire had geometry. Wir verteidigen nicht Monte Cassino. Monte Cassino verteidigt uns. Their saying ran, half boast and half statement of physics, as the pulverized abbey and shattered ridges gave 1,000 firing points and almost no silhouettes to hit. The rubble did the work. Allied artillery answered with scale and system. 8th Army massed over 1,000 guns in its sector, from 25th Light Pounders, 87.6 Mo throwing smoke and HE, to 5.5-inch mediums, 140 MeV and 7.2-inch heavies, 183 MeV for counter-battery and bunker busting, their programs timed by the minute. Clocks drew blood. On 11th of May at 2300 hours, the barrage for Operation Diadem opened with an industrial thunder. Concentrations rippling in, Mike and Uncle. Targets, while separate batteries laid curtains of smoke that crept and pooled along the spurs like a manufactured fog. The air turned to instrument. British 4.2-inch mortar companies, born as chemical units, pumped dense smoke into clefts and drawers, renewing screens by fire plan rather than hope so the ascents could move under a movable roof. Visibility was a weapon too. Polish 2I Corps climbed within that man-made weather by template. Assault companies in narrow columns with scouts and sappers forward, Vickers machine guns in sustained fire to rake flanks, and artillery on call to box a German counter-attack into dead ground. The drill was an answer. Engineers carried Bangalore torpedoes, wire cutters, and 10 cable coils, feeling for mines with bayonets, taping roots with white cloth, and cutting steps into scree that slid like shot under boots and mules. Feet did what tracks could not. Communications rode both air and stone, 18 and 38 wireless sets for company and platoon, line parties laying field cable behind them to keep a voice to the guns when wireless dropped behind a ridge. Speech had to climb too. Where caves had been turned into embrasures, infantry used P8s as ad hoc bunker busters. Hurling spigot launched HE at apertures while rifle, grenades and Bren guns pinned the mouths of stone. When range was too short, flamethrowers spoke once and changed the argument. Tools found angles. The German defence prized economy. Forward edges held thinly, strong points offset on reverse slopes, and counterattacks by platoon sized Stostrups that tried to pry poles off newly, 1 notches before wire and guns could settle. Elasticity resisted weight. Artillery observers on both sides lived by seconds. Polish and British FOO teams with prismatic compasses and range cards inked onto ruined walls. German forward observers chained by wire to batteries behind the ridge lines, each fighting to pull the next minute toward their side. Time was a caliber. Terrain turned every caliber into a personality. The 25 pounders flat crack bouncing in terraces, the 5.5 inches rolling thump shaking prayer stones loose, the Nebelwerfer 6 note howl telling men to flatten and count to 5 before the ripples arrived. Sound taught survival. Doctrine recognized gravity's politics. Armor could not climb the ridgelines, so firepower and feet must, with mule columns hauling 30-inch mortar rounds. 25-pounder shells broken into man loads, water in jerrycans, and stretchers down paths that punished the living and the dead alike. Logistics was pain. Within the abbey's ruin, the paratroopers cut firing ports into fractured arches and used the crypts as aid posts and magazines outside. They camouflaged MGP-42 tripods with olive bos and plaster dust until only heat shimmer gave them away in a scope. Disappearance was an art. On the Polish side, Anders' orders decomposed the summit into coordinates and points, 593, 569. Phantom Ridge, and assigned them to battalions with time windows, dictated by the movement of smoke and the turn of the gun's fire plan. The map became a metronome. A company diarist in the 3rd Carpathians wrote of smoke that smelled of sulphur and herbs, and of sappers, feeling the ground like blind men. A line that sits beside range tables and ammunition returns in the same hand. Poetry bled through procedure. Signals discipline kept the climb from dissolving. Brevity on the nets, prearranged lifts of fire, and a hard rule that no unit would stay to win a duel against a cave. They would mark, bypass, and call steel to solve what a rifle could not. Pride bent to method. When German, Gigenstos, parties came back at dusk or under the moon, the guns reached down pre-registered lanes and vicars, belts hissed through condensing night air, while mortar crews flipped fuse settings. In gloved hands without looking. Practice replaced sight. Every weapon had a counter-script. MG-42 beaten by smoke and angle, mortars answered by counter-mortar sound ranging. Nebelwerfers hunted by flash, spotting, and those 88s quieted by heavies working from deception OPs, none of it perfect, all of it cumulative. Margins made breakthroughs. Fridolin von Senger und Etterlin would later concede that the bombing had made a field of ruins, ideal for defense. A soldier's way of admitting that stone and blast had married into a fortress no blueprint could have designed. The environment chose sides. By mid-May, the machine of the battle, guns, smoke, mules, wire, radios and men, had a character all its own, a rhythm of lift and climb, screen and hold, that wore even paratroopers thin, where they had seemed made of the mountain. Endurance found its limit, and at its heart lay a simple mechanical truth that outlasted slogans. A manufactured fog, plus disciplined increments of fire and movement, could make angles where none existed, and angles could pry hands from a crown of stone. Night of 17th to 18th of May 1944, the massif breathed smoke and dust as Polish Shave Corps went forward again under a sky rinsed by flares and the slow blink of gun flashes walking up the ridges. The mountain waited. On Phantom Ridge, the 3rd Carpathian Rifle Division edged past cans of shattered stone, bayonets low, Bren teams pinning cave mouths while sappers felt for wire and mines by touch, not sight. Every step was argued. Hill 593 Monte Calvario lay ahead like a broken altar, its reverse slope raked by 8i CM mortars and the cough of MG-42s that stitched phosphor sparks through the smoke until the wind dragged the curtain thick again. The air tasted of lye and thyme. Forward, step by step, a company commander rasped on the No 18. The phrase crawling over static to a platoon that crawled over stone. Each pause measured to the lift of a 255-pounder concentration that moved like a hand. The guns set the rhythm. At 02:30, grenades bounced inside the last sangers on 593 and a charge screamed, "Aura!" Over the lip, bayonets and short bursts solving arguments fought for months. By 0300, a runner scratched it into the log. 593 hours. The stone had changed sides. To the left, the 5th Kresoa Infantry Division traded slopes and boulders around Hill 569. Men in chalk, whitened helmets hauling helmets like luggage to slap shots at cave mouths that laughed at bullets, but flinched at a spigot bomb. Improvisation made a path. Down at Albernetta Farm, a ruin among ruins, the German paratroopers' field telephone wires led into darkness, where wounded lay packed shoulder to shoulder, and a Feldwebel checked his last belt and listened for an order that might not come. Even steel has edges. Our smoke worked like a roof. A Polish FO wrote later, "Hort when it tore." The mountain tried to kill us again. The sentence sat like a stone on the page. By dawn, the terraces around San Angelo, and the bare knuckles of the spur below, the abbey were crawling with men who had refused to slide back in the night, and every ridge taken made the next one a little clearer in the map case. Persistence became geometry. The 1st Force Division, bled and bone, tired, counted its last grenades, and phoned the valleys for word. To their west, Juin's French Expeditionary Corps had cut through the Orontsi and was rolling the flank, and to their north and east, 6E Corps was breaking the Liri gates. The net was tearing. Fridolin von Senger and Ettelin's order went out in the dark with the flatness of defeat wrapped as prudence. Hold until night, then slip, step by step, through the gullies to the next prepared line, because to stay was to be pocketed. Pride learned to fold. "I shall withdraw from the monastery position tonight." A paratroop officer recorded in a terse diary note that still smells of candle smoke in copies. Ammunition low, flanks threatened. The fortress chose survival. Up on the spur, a Polish patrol under 2nd Lieutenant Kazimierz Gerbil felt the wind shift and tasted plaster, not cordite, in the air drifting from the cloister. They lifted their heads, saw only broken arches and silence, and sprinted the last meters through powder that rose like incense. Absence felt louder than fire. At 10:20 hours on 18th of May, inside the shattered square of St. Benedict's house, a red and white cloth snapped into the sun, and Bugler Emil Czech lifted his instrument and blew the Hejna. Mariaki, the old call that breaks off mid-note, as if killed by an arrow, its last breath swallowed by the rubble. Tradition pierced the ruin. The signallers cranked and tapped, FLA Grerei Sidio and monastery, and the message ran down the wire to brigade, division, corps. Then out across an army that had waited half a year to hear it in any language. A whisper became an order of the day. General Anders' announcement followed like a prayer pinned to a wall. "Monte Cassino is ours." A sentence short enough to fit in a pocket, and heavy enough to carry a nation on it. Exile found a summit. Below, stretcher teams moved past German wounded in the crypts and traced a cross in powder, with 2 fingers before lifting, while a paratrooper too tired to hate murmured, "Guten Tag." To the men who offered him water, the abbey made everyone small. The stones watched. From 14. Panzerkorps logs, clipped and technical, came the other half of the moment. Reports of an orderly withdrawal completed, rear guards lifted. New line forming on the Senger, Hitler, line. Language that tried to make a story of angles instead of blood. Words hid loss. The Polish regimental diary that night put it plainer. Y entered a church without a roof, and found God in the faces of the wounded and our own dead. Faith shared the trench with fatigue. And in a battered dugout somewhere down the slope, a German radio man keying the last situation report let his hand hover over the switch, as if the monastery itself might answer. Then he sent it, and the air did not argue back. Silence closed like a door. The mountain that had been called impregnable was not stormed room by room. It was emptied by the pressure of smoke and stone and flanking victories until a patrol walked into a myth and found it hollow. Belief shattered on contact,